Burnley are back in action on Saturday against Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park, and Vincent Kompany has been talking to the media ahead of that game. We'll take a look at the Palace test ahead and Kompany's words. Also, as the fallout from the abysmal 5-0 loss to Arsenal continues to rumble, we'll be answering your questions in our latest Q&A session. All that and much more coming up on this episode of From the Be-All End.
Jimmy McElroy to Upton. Go!
So, plenty to get through this week. Before we do crack on, just a quick word of appreciation for the feedback we've been receiving, particularly since the Arsenal debrief. The words of support and the comments you send in really are appreciated. We do read them all and discuss them amongst ourselves, sometimes at great length. The reaction to the Arsenal pod has been really positive, and the numbers of fans listening, according to our data, continues to grow, to our never-ending surprise. One of the reasons why we decided to do a Q&A this week is that we do want this podcast to be part of the broader conversation around the club. So keep your comments and questions coming. Right, now let's get to business. Vincent Kompany talking about Saturday's match at Crystal Palace. The major news was the confirmation, really, that Aaron Ramsey's out for the season and indeed isn't likely to return until next season is well underway. No word on the exact injury, but Greavesy, not any news anyone wanted to hear at all, is it that?
No, it's not. And, Ramsey's perhaps been one of these players that's had to bide his time for a bit of a chance, had a bit of a run in the game, finding his feet and things like that. And, it's probably fair to say that, his impact on the squad and the team perhaps hasn't lived up to what he'd have expected or what Vincent and the recruitment team would have expected. But you just knew on Saturday that it looked a bad injury. I mean, the time it took for to kind of get him off, and he was taking on board oxygen and things. It looked a bad one, I'd be very surprised if Vincent had come out and said, yeah, he's going to be back before the end of the season, things like that. So it does sound like 2024 might be mostly a write-off for him. So we wish him well, and I just think he's a player who, like so many we've talked about, probably needs a running aside that's slightly higher up in confidence. I think he is a bit of a confidence player, and it is difficult coming into a side who are losing every week, shipping goals and not being able to kind of get a foothold in things. So, yeah, not a surprise at all. Really sad to hear that we're not going to see him for a while in the claret and blue shirt. And I'm sure, given all the sports science and the medical staff we have, I'm sure he'll get the best treatment going forward.
Yeah, I'm sure we all share those sentiments. Chris, I mean, no confirmation from Kompany what the actual injury is. I mean, most are presuming it's a ACL, a cruciate ligament, an anterior cruciate ligament injury, but not wanting to say exactly what it was. Now, I'm not saying we desperately need to know what it is. I'm just curious though, because you've been in endless press conferences over the years where you're asking about injuries pretty much every week. It seems to be like the club's policy now not to give any details on injuries. I know some of the clubs seem to be taking a similar approach, but what do you make of that?
I could go back to sort of like the old school journalism and pre-internet, and you'd be trying to fill your notebook, and if you had long-term injuries, obviously as bad as it was for the lads, it was good from a newspaper perspective, because you'd probably be able to sort of touch base with those every now and again and just sort of update on their progress, how they were doing, that sort of thing. And I don't think it does anyone any harm to know what their injury is. We're not trying to, prevent Crystal Palace from, a bit of giving them a bit of insight into what Burnley's team might look like at the weekend. If he's done a particular injury, if it's an ACL, whatever it is, if he's going to be out for a long period, I don't think it does anyone any harm to know what it is really. But like I say, the days of access to players are a long way away from what I experienced back in the day, and it's just a shame really. You probably won't even see sight and sound of him until he's returning to fitness. Like with Bayer, we don't know what's up with Bayer, how long he's likely to be out. It's just seems a bit strange at the moment. I think fans like to know as well, don't they? Like a sort of an idea of when they're likely to return. And
he did say that Bayer's getting close. Didn't sound like it'd be this weekend, but getting close. And Mike Trezor might be back this weekend as well. I mean, apart from that, I mean, talking about the Palace game, there was quite a few questions to him about pressure, about how he's handling failure, really, all couched in the sort of you're used to winning at the top end of the table. I mean, Justin, was there anything that struck you about Kompany's words in that press conference?
It's all got a bit strange, I think, those press conferences. He's starting to feel to me like he feels like he's under a little bit of pressure. I don't know what everybody else thinks, but he's developing that dark art that football managers get when they get their backs into a corner of like talking without really saying very much, not giving very much away. The interesting quote that came to mind was he said something about like that we don't need to worry about the team, giving like 100% effort.
Fire in the bellies, I think.
Fire in the bellies, yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but I think the general consensus over the last few days is that was the one thing that was missing from the performance against Arsenal. So, like I say, a little bit of a strange thing to say. But apart from that, the press conferences are getting duller and duller by the week, aren't they? But I mean, he kind of doesn't have anything else really to say because he has to try to remain positive in whatever way he can. He's not really going to come on and say, Christ, we were awful last week, weren't we? I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know what I'm going to do next.
No,
he has to remain upbeat, and you can understand that. I thought he says some strange things, and that being a perfect example. I don't think we really learn anything that teaches us something about what's going on, and I don't think we really learn anything about what might happen, going forward at the weekend. He doesn't really give that much away anymore, does he?
No, I think one of the big issues really is you're right. They are getting duller. I've just checked his kind of comments, and we've at least got a slightly different headline this week. It's usually like we've got to take our chances. Kompany looks ahead to taking chances, but it's still that kind of we're training every day to get that result. We go in with a mentality to get that result. If they did have any fire in the belly last week, then that fire was extinguished pretty quickly inside 4 minutes by Odegaard's goal, and never really were able to get it back, were they? And like you say, that I had to chuckle when you said that dark art of saying quite a bit but not really saying anything. And you never kind of thought Kompany would slip into that, did you?
No, because he seemed very open. And last year, everyone kept saying, what a good talker he was and how refreshing it was to hear from a manager like that. And maybe that's what the Premier League does to you. I don't know. I mean, there was one bit that Woody intrigued me. He was asked about sort of, if there'd been too many changes from last season. These little themes that we've, been banging on about for ages and that fans have been talking about in pubs and so on, they are starting to creep into the media narrative a little bit, aren't they? With the Benson question and other things starting to be talked about. And he said, to summarize what he said, he basically said, we built a team to do a job in the Championship, and we did that. But the Premier League's a completely different level, so we had to build another team, is basically what he said, which is, I don't think he's ever come out and explicitly said that's what it was all about. What did you make of that, Woody?
I mean, yeah, and like everybody else has said, it was a lot of saying something without saying much, but having to parse the finer details in terms of him talking about desire etc. But he looked like a bit of a tortured soul. I don't know whether he got up late or something this morning, but he did look a little bit more tortured than he usually does, And this idea about desire and teams coming up and teams going down, and it's still this lack of, general transparency that all fits together, that we don't necessarily know what this project is and what the goals are moving forwards. Of course, he can't come out and say, yes, let's turf it all off and build for next season, because there's obviously still an outside chance that we may stay up, and they've obviously got to play towards that. But it still seems a little bit, it does seem a little bit off, like everybody else has said.
Yeah, I mean, looking ahead to this Palace game now, then, I mean, after the Arsenal game, it's doom and gloom everywhere. But by the time we get to Friday evening and we start thinking about Saturday's games, little bits of optimism sort of start to kick in. And I've seen some people saying, well, if the penalty punishments for Everton and Forest are strong or stronger, there might still be a glimmer of hope and so on. But if there is going to be a glimmer of hope, even with the penalty points, got to start winning some games. So what changes would not ones do we expect from Company, because that's kind of a bit of a pointless exercise, really, isn't it? But what changes would you be looking to make for that game, Justin? I mean, I know this is something you've been pondering a little bit. What would you be looking to do with that?
Well, I think 100%. The first thing that I would do if I was picking the team is I would try my level best to get as much Premier League experience on the pitch as possible, and build around that with the most talented young players that we've got. I mean, that quote that you just mentioned from the press conference about Company saying that he built a side for the Championship, and then it sort of explains a lot about what's happened since. That he'd obviously decided that those players weren't good enough for the Premier League. Even the players that had got quite a lot of Premier League experience under the belt, like Brownhill and Taylor were ditched, early on in the season. I know Brownhill's come back and he's captain now, which is also a bit odd. But it explains what's happened with Zaroury and Benson. He just made his mind up, hadn't he, that they weren't good enough for the Championship and we needed to for the Premier League, and we needed to rebuild again. I have to say, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support that view, is there? I mean, all the evidence points to the contrary. Well, I mean, if you look at the team that played on Saturday, there's only one player that was even at the club last season. That's Brownhill. And he got absolutely smashed. So you got to conclude that the team currently, the rebuilt team, the team that is the one that is going to be better than the team that romped the Championship, is, on the face of it, seems worse than the one we ended up with at the end of last season. And teams like Luton haven't had a complete rebuild. Even though we finished way ahead of them last season, they've just added a bit of quality. And I know they're still in the relegation zone, but they are, making a better fist of it than us. So I think go back to that basic idea that we get as much Premier League experience on the pitch as we can, and I would go so far as to say that includes getting J-Rod up front, and good. We're always a better side, I think, with Gudmundsson in. I don't know. Obviously, I think Cork perhaps misses out because we've got Brownhill and we've got Sander Berger, who thinks I had a decent season, but I would certainly have him in the squad. I just, like I say, I would get as many of those Premier League experienced players on the pitch, because that brings a little bit of experience and a little bit of leadership to it. As far as who else plays, there's a whole raft of young players who we've brought in this season who have, in many ways, I'm finding difficult to distinguish between them because they're kind of all been as awful as each other, haven't they?
Greavesy, would you give Masengo a start at this stage? I mean, he's the one out of all of them. We haven't barely seen anything from, a couple of fleeting sub appearances. Is this a game you'd throw him in for?
Well, this is another thing. I did hear that he'd also picked up a knock, albeit a very slight one, hence the reason he wasn't in the Arsenal lineup.
does seem
Yeah,
a lot of knocks.
we do get the odd knock, and it does appear to be kind of training based. But like I say, I don't know. I've not been able to confirm that, but that was what I was told last the back end of kind of just after the Arsenal game, because I was whinging about him, getting minutes at Anfield and then being nowhere near kind of having a week off to go to the Trafford Centre. And somebody said, oh, actually, he apparently did pick up a knock, turned his ankle or something in training. So, but no, I'd be bringing Corky back in. I have to say, I'd be dropping the Amdouni experiment. We already know we need to replace Ramsey. So Goodmanson comes in for Ramsey out wide for me. Court comes in for Amdouni, and that then allows us to push Sander Berge forward into that number 10 role. It shows that midfielder, three in midfield, listen, Corky's not going to need the legs that everyone seems to, and company seems to think he needs legs and things like that. You pack that midfield with Berger and, the insert expletive ghost, Mr. Brownhill. You've got the running from Brownhill, which is great because he just runs around in circles and he puts his two arms in the air, then hits the first man from a corner. So we know what the two arms in the air means for Brownie. But I'd have Corky just sat there, just disrupting, just doing what Corky does best. You know what? We've only got, 13 games left for the season. If we get 5 games out of him and he gets 5 yellow cards and misses a 6, great. Let him sit out for a game, bring him back. I know the fear is that his legs have gone. This is what we keep getting told. You don't need legs in a midfield against Palace if you've got Berger and Brownhill and quicker lads on the wing and Goodmanson who can tuck in. So I'd stick with Fofana up front rather than Jay just for now. I do think I'd like to see more of Jay, but drop the Amdouni experiment, get Cork in that midfield, push Berger into number 10, Goodmanson out wide, back 4 as it is, Trafford in goal, 3 points. Thank you very much. Good run of games coming up. We're surviving.
This game's carried away. Here we go again.
Yeah, it is.
Nothing from that free bet on that win over Arsenal.
No, I'm not that positive. But listen, you've just got to, as a manager, you've got to give your team a chance to succeed. At the minute, we're putting out a team that doesn't give us any chance of success. Whatever success looks like, a point at Sellers Park, 3 points, whatever. Stop with these silly experiments. Get some Premier League experience, like Justin said, in there.
Would you concur with that?
Pretty much. I think if we're going to have any chance, we've got to defend as a full unit. We've got to start dashing it a little bit better. There's far too much disconnect between what goes on up front, midfield to the back. We see it week in, week out. Huge gaps all over the place. So we need a little bit more nous. And whether that's packing the midfield, obviously, like we've been saying, I think that makes a lot of sense if we're going to have any chance whatsoever. And yes, get rid of the Amdouni experiment.
Chris, any tactical shifts coming from the former Stanley women coach?
So I watched Palace Monday night at Everton, and whether the team selection, whether the new boss Glasner had much input into that. I'm not sure. He was in the stands at Goodison, but they shifted to 3 centre halves with a midfield 4, and basically Ayew and Edouard off the big fella Mateta. So it's what I'd thicken midfield up. Whether I just think it's a massive ask for Corky, having barely kicked a ball in 12 months, to come in and compete with the likes of Lerma and young Wharton that's coming from Blackburn that I can see absolutely just dominating this game, like he was doing at Ewood Park before Cork's introduction last season. It's a forlorn task, isn't it? You're even looking at people like Fofana's had an impact, but we aren't staying up. And Fofana's not going to be here next year. So should you be looking at, he's short of options in that area, I know. But, I think Jay's out of contract. So, Jay might not be here next year. So what do you do in the forward areas, really? You might as well persevere with Amdouni. Well, that's why I was quite, you're looking at Ramsey almost just playing him through, even though he wasn't, particularly playing well week on week. you might as well play him through, give him a run of games, and unfortunately he's picked up the injury. But same with Amdouni, if he's going to be here next year, you might as well play him through, because the lads who aren't here next year, what's point enhancing Fofana for Chelsea's perspective if he ain't going to be at Burnley next year?
Yeah, one of the questions that we have coming up is on that, so we'll go into that a bit deeper in a bit. In fact, let's move on now to the questions we sent in. We put a request out on Twitter for listeners to fire us in some questions, reacting a little bit to the Arsenal debrief as well, but also any sort of broader Clarets questions. We'll get into those right after this break. Right, so here we go then, Q&A time. Right, let's start off with one that throws back a little bit to what we just were talking about the company's press conference, but just a different aspect on it. Rob Skeeth says, anybody else think the company loves to talk about himself? The first 10 minutes of today's presser were all about him. The question was about desire, hinting his players are showing none. Company then went on a ramble about his father. Is it just me? Ego has landed. Is that harsh, Woody?
Yes. Do you want to expand on that? No.
Go on.
Yeah. No, it's that deflection tactic, isn't it? All good managers, in some which way, shape, or form, try and protect their players from any shit that they're going to get from externally. Now, we can go down the Michael Beale route and not shake players' hands, be a complete twat, and have sock puppet accounts on Twitter, etc., and be a bit of an arse. Or you can try in various ways and means to make sure that that they're not getting too much, they're not getting criticised by management, etc. So I think it's just necessarily his way of going about that. He can't really help the questions that are thrown in his direction.
No, that's true. Although I must admit, I sort of know where the question is coming from a little bit when, the question is about, whenever there's a question about pressure or, relentlessness of the Premier League and all that, it's always a little bit like, oh, what pressure for me? Like relentlessness for me after what I've been through in my career? There's a little bit of that there. Although having said that, I did quite like the story about his dad being a refugee from a dictatorship and everything he'd gone through and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure really if it was relevant to that question, but Justin, what do you make of companies' sort of approach on these kind of things?
I don't mind it. I like a bit of colour. That got to the. It gives you an insight into a bit of their personality. I think Woody's right. It is a bit of a deflection tactic. If he's talking about his parents, he's not criticising the players. He's not answering the questions. He's not talking about the pressure that he's under at the moment. He's not really talking about what you would describe as the matters at hand, is he? He's kind of just filling in the background. But like you say, I quite enjoy those little stories he tells about his past. But it is a little bit like, I mean, the general gist of the conversation was you've had it easy. You've played, you've played the bulk of your success has been at Manchester City, where it's easy to be successful because of everything goes in your way, and he bristles a bit at that sort of thing, does he? Because I have struggled to get where I am today, so I do understand what it is to struggle.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Yeah,
it's always a bit kind of, you just think a bit, oh God, is that really the road that you want to go down? But it's more interesting than saying nothing, isn't it? Let's put it that way.
I mean, Greavesy, from a journalist's point of view, it's kind of the difference between what journalists want to hear and what fans want to hear, isn't it? Because fans would love nothing more than him to go into a big rant saying that performance was completely unacceptable, etc. Whereas journalists love a story about his dad coming from a dictatorship and escaping and then building a new life and becoming a member of parliament in Belgium and so on and so forth. That's good. That's good stuff. That makes your story a little bit different. Yeah, is he talking maybe more to the journalists than the fans in these things?
I think he is, yeah. And I think there is a bit of kind of self-preservation almost in terms of There's deflection as Woody and Justin have touched on. But I think, I'm the same as Justin. I quite enjoy them kind of stories. I enjoy listening to company talk about his background and his journey and things like that. And I think it does give you an insight into his mentality and his thinking. I can understand why fans get a bit miffed in terms of, it's not about him and, we'd never compare him. I don't think I'd ever heard him compared with or spoken about in the same sentence as Mr. Beale, Ian Beale up in Sunderland. But yeah, I get why. I get that question. When I saw that question come through, I kind of thought, yeah, I can see why that annoys fans, because we do want passion. He talks about he's got fire in the belly and, he's working and mentality and all this stuff. And sometimes that mentality shtick can come across as a bit Jake Humphries, a little bit high performance podcast, a little bit, everyone's got a kind of, everyone's got a mentality, haven't they? And everyone's got a mindset. Got to have a mindset. Where's the mindset?
A growth mindset.
Growth mindset. A mindset to succeed. A mindset to take his chances. I get more bored by that constant, we've got to have passages where we want to take chances and we know we have to create chances. That bores me because it's the same thing every week. Throwing in a nice kind of story about his background, I think, adds to the layers that we know about him. So I have no problem with it as a fan or a journalist, but I can understand why it annoys people.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, one of the differences is, I suppose, that for most of the time, these press conferences at Burnley over the years have been a relatively small number of journalists sat at the training ground with the Burnley manager, whoever that may be. And now it's going out live on YouTube and live on Twitter. The whole fans are watching. So it is a different. It used to be that, fans would find out what the manager said at a press conference from you and your colleagues at the Telegraph as well, and the handful of national papers that would cover Burnley press conferences in the pre-Premier League years anyway. And now the fans are seeing it for themselves. So do you think they need to maybe shift the emphasis of these things if they are going out direct to fans? Because no one's interpreting it. No one's doing them any favours. It's right out there for everyone to make what they want of it, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Like I say, you've got the order of things. You see, I think this Birdie still does a bit for the club, and you get the television companies who go for the more obvious, want to go straight to the crux of things, really. But it's trying to get you're often left when it came to the local lads, when everything newsy's been asked and done to death, trying to get a bit of colour, just for something different, or something for a rainy day during the week, perhaps. But I'd say I'm one of those. I quite like, talking about his struggles at Hamburg and injuries and what he came through there, and family tragedies and things like that, and it just gives you a bit more insight. I think he's one of those, and if the question is sort of Vinny's great time at Manchester City and the trophies he's won and playing for Belgium's greatest team, etc., he doesn't like the personal accolades, but I quite like him delving into how he developed that, his mindset, etc. But it's the veil's slipped, hasn't it, on press conferences now? It's just out in the open for all to see. But it does get. I mean, what do you want? The old every game's tough at this level sort of thing. Just want something different, don't you?
Yeah, it's difficult for managers, really, and for the media, because the media are going to, like you say, Sky are going to go in there and go for the most obvious national line they can get, which is like, Roy Hodgson's out, there's a new manager in at Palace. Does that change your thinking, Vincent? And you sort of almost sigh when that question gets answered, because there's no way he's going to go, it's going to be completely different with this. They're always going to give you a standard answer, but they've got their job to do. The local boys have got their job to do. The fans want to hear something different. It's almost impossible to please everyone. Let's move along to another question now. David Clark, this is a really interesting one. David Clark asks, should Burnley appoint...
Dave Clark? Glad
There's only one of him. There's only one of him. Yeah. Should Burnley appoint a director of football to improve recruitment and give the board a second voice on players and player development? That's a really interesting one, given that, Company has basically said he'd made his mind up about last year's team, that they weren't going to be good enough. If he'd have had a director of football, they might have said something different in that recruitment process. But what do you think about it? Justin? What do you think about that one? Director of football?
It's a difficult one to answer that, because I think we've talked about this before, and I'm not 100% sure who makes the final decision anyway. We don't have that transparency, do we? We don't. I think the project, this, buy them young and sell them, train them up and sell them off, is obviously an ALK thing, isn't it? That's their way of doing business, and Company's clearly bought into that. Does Company have the final say on who's bought and who isn't bought? Does anybody else at the club have any input into who they buy and who they don't buy? I'm sure it must be a collective decision in the end by all the top end coaching staff. I mean, surely Craig Bellamy has some input into it, and the scouting team and the recruitment team and so on. So I don't know. And bringing another person into that situation, is that just going to be another voice that muddies the water, or is it going to be a defining voice that brings some reason to it, without having a great deal of clarity on what the structure is about the team that makes these decisions? It's quite difficult to know. I think a director of football's worked elsewhere, hasn't it? And I think the recruitment in the summer was so poor as to suggest that they do need some help from somebody, but it's getting the right person for that job. And I'm not sure that the club has a great record on that score. Are they getting the right people in the right positions?
No, I mean, talking of muddying the water, it's actually a firm called Mud Analytics that's owned by Vincent Kompany and a former Manchester City staffer that seems to do quite a lot of the analytical analysis on the recruitment side. We don't know what say they have in it, but I would imagine when it comes down to a financial decision about spending 15 million on a player, it goes to the board. It certainly goes to Pace and that leadership group. I mean, Andrew, do you think there's a case for we're seeing Dan Ashworth and a 20 million possible deal from Newcastle to Manchester United? Directors of football are very much a thing at the moment. Is it something that the club should consider?
I'd say no, because I think part of the problem is that it's the board who would choose a director of football, or the board and Vincent Kompany who would choose a director of football. And I wouldn't, you know what I mean? I think the reason Ashworth might work at Man United is because it's a fresh pair of eyes coming in. It's Jim Radcliffe. I saw his interview with Dan Rowan, and he wasn't really that committed to Ten Hag. He did say, well, kind of, we've had a lot of coaches very capable, and it might be the environment. So my big issue with bringing in a director of football is who would come in, who would get that role. I mean, chances are it'd be Jenkins, who is the whatever Jenkins's role is. And, he started off as an ALK consultant, then becomes, head of development, whatever it is. So I don't believe, and this is not me, trying to score cheap points against Pace and ALK. I don't think they have the experience to pick a director of football that's going to do the job that we would want a director of football to be, which would be somebody to stand up to the recruitment team and Vincent. And I'm not trying to draw battle lines or anything like that, but there needs to be some accountability. Yeah. So my issue would be, I don't think ALK are experienced or knowledgeable enough to go out and get a director of football that would be effective. And like I said, that's not me slagging off Pace and ALK.
No, I think that's a really good point.
I think it becomes an ineffective appointment unless you have somebody like Radcliffe's coming to Man United. He's brought Dave Brailsford in as sporting director. Dave Brailsford is used to having the best. So he's gone, who's the best in this business? It's Dan Ashworth. I think they're also looking at Jason Wilcox at Southampton, and who's in a very similar role. Dougie Freeman gets a lot of kind of good rep when he's been at Palace and things. So there are good director of footballs out there, and there's a lot of people who are unknown. I think Chelsea have just taken someone from Brighton. But I don't think ALK have the network and the advisors, and I'm sure they do have advisors on football matters, that are experienced enough to pick an effective director of football. And like I said, that's not a cheap shot. That's a genuine concern that it would become an absolutely ineffective waste of money for ALK.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a brilliant point, because what you're looking for, really, if you're talking about, and the questioner sort of raises this, have another voice, another point of view, or another perspective. What you're asking ALK to do is to go in there, somebody to go in there and say, I don't like your project. I don't think your project's the right project. And that's not what anything we've heard from Alan Pace or ALK or anything. Do they want somebody?
Yeah.
They would. Yeah. All their appointments so far indicate they would hire somebody who says, I love your project.
Yeah.
I think your project's great. And the same, you wonder with Vincent Kompany, would he want somebody coming in and going, Vincent, these lads from Belgium, it's a big step up from the Belgian league to the Premier League. You can't go signing all these kids. You might signing too many wingers. Is that what Vincent Kompany wants to do? I don't think it is. So the culture of the club doesn't seem well tuned to having a director of football. Woody, any thoughts on this one? Because it is something that a lot of people have raised recently.
Yeah, it's very much a club infrastructure thing, isn't it? Like everybody said, and that I also don't believe that ALK have that level of experience to be able to bring somebody in for that. Granted, if there's a discussion to be had and Vincent would like a director of football, that's slightly different. But I think what everybody said is pretty much spot on.
Yep. There's some really good questions coming. We're not going to be able to get through all of them today, and some of them touch upon things that we've already sort of gone through, I think, to some degree. There's one here from Casey James. I think not signing Teller when he wanted to join and not trying to keep that side together and unleash them on the Premier League is one of the biggest mishaps I've seen as a Burnley fan, and will be talked about as a huge miss for years upon years to come. I mean, we've said, many times, including earlier in this episode, that it was a mistake not to keep that side together initially and build upon that. But on the Teller one in particular, Chris, do you think that Teller is a player who, in years to come, people are going to look back on and say, look at him, he's playing for England, he's a top player, and Burnley had a chance to get him for 15 or whatever, 20 or whatever it was, and passed up on it? Was it that bad of a miss?
Again, it's opinions, isn't it? We're talking about a lad who was exceptional in the Championship, but had no Premier League pedigree. And it's that, seems to have made his mind up about Benson and Zarori not quite being able to cut the mustard at list level. Maybe he wasn't convinced for the price tag that Teller was good value in the Premier League, with it, unproven at that level. And again, we still don't know. He's people talk about, he's ripping it up at Leverkusen. It's not a regular starter. Obviously, he looked like he played very well in the handsome win over Bayern Munich a couple of weeks ago. But in terms of his impact there, it's been more as a substitute. So I mean, he's one of those. We talk about getting good characters. He was one of those who would he would lift the fans. Looked like he really good relationship with the players, probably lift the dressing room, etc. So on that basis, it would have been good business. But the only thing I would counter that with, if you don't fancy Teller at that sort of price, again, we're led to believe Amdouni was a similar price tag, and again, untested at Premier League level. Had a very good half season at Bâle, and emerged as the Conference League's top goal scorer. But again, I mean, that doesn't say a great deal necessarily, does it? Antonio could have ended up as it don't mean you're a world beater, does it necessarily? But it's a tough one. But they just felt. I mean, whether Southampton weren't playing ball necessarily as well, just one that didn't happen, unfortunately.
I do wonder if Teller hadn't have been on loan last year and he'd just been one of the players who we'd signed for 3 or 4 million, like so many others for that team, whether he would have featured much in the Premier League, to be honest. Because I mean, if Zarori and Brenton didn't get a chance, would Teller have got a chance? He would have done if we'd have gone out and paid 15 million for him, I'm sure. But if it had just been a normal squad member, I wonder. There's another really good question here from Brett M. Foot. Brett Foot says, Who is the player that has the highest ceiling in the squad? Who has the most potential, do we think? Greavesy, looking at this squad, who would you say has got the most potential?
I don't know. It's a difficult one. I still think I'm Dooney. I take on board everything Chris has just said and completely agree. You know, when it comes to building a squad for the Premier League, being top goal scorer, having had half a good season, isn't exactly a guarantee of success. But I do keep coming back to Amdouni being that one player who has a fairly high ceiling. I think in terms of biggest percentage profit, i.e. kind of what we paid and what we get, I think Koleosho, albeit depending on how he comes back from his injury and we know players sometimes aren't the same when they come back. So hopefully, Luca is. Odegaard, as I mentioned on Monday, I don't get the mass kind of excitement around Odegaard yet. Again, given the fee we paid for him, it wasn't a cheap signing. One half decent season at in the French league. So yeah, probably Amdouni for me, but he's got a bloody long, he's got a bloody long way to go to get to that stage where he's kind of, reaching those heights, and he might be one of those players who leaves us and flourishes elsewhere, and eventually brings the biggest transfer fee. But Amdouni or Koleosho for me.
Yeah, no, interesting. By the way, on Nathan Teller, as somebody's just pointed out to me, he won't be playing for England because he's played a competitive game for Nigeria already. So that one's already been decided. Justin, is there anyone stands out to you as like the player who's got the highest ceiling?
No, not really.
No, right? Woody?
What is that ceiling? what do you mean by that? Are we saying? Are we talking about that fabled £100 million player?
I think it's a bungalow rather than a high rise.
Yeah, I don't see anybody who's got the
beer
potential
cellar,
to be
maybe,
£100 million player. I mean, given what's happened this season, we'd be lucky to get back what we paid for any of them.
Yeah. Woody?
Fair play. I think there's players that you could see moving on to the Premiership immediately and as getting some money out of them and what that ceiling is. And I think out of that bunch, he's probably got O'Shea, Berger, possibly Foster. And then you've got the long term, then the likes of your Amdounis and your younger lads with potential. And they've got to realise that potential. And as we've said quite a few times on this podcast, we've got to do something with James Trafford for him to realise a ceiling at some point, because we've artificially inflated some of these ceilings already.
Boards, have you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'd probably go against Greaves. Yeah, I think Odegaard, it could be an exceptional talent. We still forget he's only 19. 5 years in the academy at PSG. You're going to have some talent to be in that. I know Paris as a city develops and creates an awful lot of footballers, but spend 5 years at that club, with what they've got going on, with the ownership and the what they're aspiring to be, etc. But looking at his figures, breakthrough season at Troyes last season, and he's bettered, his goals and assists in the Premier League with Burnley. So it's, I think, it was like 4 goals or so, and I just see an awful lot more for him to go. Again, it's like a learning process, making better decisions. But we've already seen that, the pace, the dribbling ability, the ability to score. The goal he scored at Brighton's just magnificent. Lovely little goal against Chelsea at the end of a fabulous move, etc. But just this experience could be the making of him, and especially if he has a season at Championship level, and then Burnley, fingers crossed, win promotion, and he goes again. But he excites me every time he gets the ball. Love him.
James Brindle says, "Can you pinpoint key points in the season?" We're not going to do this, but let's just put it out there as a thought. that have ultimately cost us. James suggests, for me, the Forest decision and Foster sending off was a big one. If we'd have won that and got some momentum, it could have made a big difference. Also, those 2 home games against West Ham and Palace are games we should have won. I think we'd agree with that one a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Carl Spark says, what's happened to Cullen? Could he not play alongside Sander Berger? Well, he could, and he sort of did do early in the season, didn't he? But company obviously didn't like the look of that. He was a player who I thought would struggle going up, actually, but I've not been particularly surprised by that. But here's one we can get into a little bit. Nashville Clarets says, do we sign Ashley Barnes, back from the Canaries for another championship run next year? Wasn't it just a 1-year deal? I was banging that point that we shouldn't have let him go in the first place. Woody, would you have him back next year if we've gone down? Of course you would. Come on.
I mean, yeah, why not? No, absolutely not. It's, I mean, you can see, but we've obviously moved on from that. You'd be bringing in a guy with a completely different set of players who has been moved on for a particular reason, etc. So, I mean, I would have liked to have kept him, but I don't think now we bring him back just to be this token figure in a dressing room.
He signed 2 years at Norwich anyway.
All right, there you go.
Bollocks
Right.
to it then. Yeah.
We'll not go around on that one then. Right, okay. 2-year deal at Norwich, so he'll probably be playing against us next year. Warm welcome for him at Turf Moor. Right, let's finish off with this one because it does go back to something Chris was saying that we didn't get into. You don't know what you're doing, asks. Do we drop all the players who aren't going to be here next season, get the team up to speed for next year and finish bottom, or do we play those that won't be here and finish second bottom? I'd personally drop every single player that won't be here. There is 0 point in playing them. Justin?
It's an interesting point, but I don't think I agree. I think you've got to try and just put out a team that you think is your best team at that time and try and win every game. I don't know. There's a wild card, isn't there, this season, which is the potential sanctioning of points against certain players. So you'd be a bit annoyed if you didn't play your strongest team and you didn't pick up enough points to overhaul even those teams that get points reductions for cheating. So that hangs over everything for me. I think there's still a possibility that might work out into our favour. So no, let's go for every game. Let's play our strongest team, whether the players are going to be here or not next season.
Greasy?
Yeah, I agree with Justin. I think it's quite nice and idealistic to think that you could just start with players who are going to be here next season. But unfortunately they're players that quite often are, been decided are not good enough. And if you think about, I think we ran through the list, didn't we? Either in private or on a podcast. And Jay will leave, Brownhill will leave, Cork will leave. So who are you left with? You're kind of left with, if you think about all the players who are going to be out of contract, the old kind of school players who were part of that championship team last season, you can't play them because they're all out of contract, so they're not going to be here. You're not going to play the likes of Fafana or Assignon because they're not going to stay around. It is literally just going to be probably Muric and Vitinho doing kick-ups, isn't it? And nobody needs to see Vitinho. And E. Steve's going to be about, and we know E. Steve's going to be around. No, it's a great notion, but no, you've still got to try and win every game we go into. Fire in the belly. That's what we want. We do,
yeah, and it's a good point Justin makes. We don't know what's going to happen with this disciplinary process.
Mm-hmm.
We don't. I mean, they're all assuming that it's going to get cut, Everton's thing, but it might go the other way. And we don't know what's going to happen with Forest, how many points they're going to get. So it would be ridiculous to have a situation where they got hammered with points reductions and we'd been messing around not playing for Fafana because he's not going to be here next season and we miss out by 2 points or something. They've got to go for it. They wouldn't have signed those players in January if they weren't going to do that anyway. So just a couple of questions that raise issues that I think we will get onto in future episodes. One I thought was really interesting was Ben Palmer talking about a lack of an on-pitch leader. We've talked about that. But he said, is company's system possibly overwhelming players? Is this the reason for the poor performances? I see a lot of our players hitting zones rather than being present in the match. That's a really interesting one. One person to just handle that one, because it's something we might go into in depth, actually, with somebody who can look at sort of the tactics of it and so on. But that idea that the players are not focused in the sort of 100% in the game, but on doing specific tasks they've been told to do by company. Has anyone else picked that up watching it? The guys in the stadium, really?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it the other week that I didn't feel we played with any emotion. It was very much kind of the metrics we were using, or the metrics the company was using to decide on whether a performance had been good or not, were not the what I'd call emotional metrics, the decision making. So we want to get passes. You want to get as many passes as possible. And he'll point to the fact that we had X amount of touches in the opposition box. I saw somebody on Twitter or on Up the Clarets saying, actually, yeah, the Arsenal performance was bad, but we had more touches in the opposition box than we had against X, which we all see as a better performance. And I think when you start getting into those kind of fairly wanky metrics, it doesn't give you the full picture of what a game is. Ultimately, I've said this several times. Mickey Phelan said before the start of the season, you said to him, what's the difference between players at Championship level, players at Premier League level? He said, the ability to make decisions and the right decision under pressure at the right time. And I don't think this system gives the players the empowerment to make decisions, snap decisions at the right time. And we're so bothered about the system and keep doing things that we know aren't working because we think we keep doing them. It becomes muscle memory and we'll eventually get good at them. When actually last season, when we kind of dropped some of that muscle memory stuff, i.e. Muric always playing out from the back, when Muric started to go long, we cut out the mistakes. We started unleashing Teller, Benson, Zarori. We started playing a lot more emotionally than pure metrics of you've got to get X amount of running in. Somebody pointed out, Brownhill's done more running than any other Burnley player. How many of those centimetres, metres, kilometres have been effective running? You think of some of the best players in the Premier League, it's effective running. And Brownhill can run around like a headless chicken all he wants. But if he's ineffective with or without the ball, that metric counts at absolutely sod all. So I think whoever said that question is absolutely right. Ben Palmer, was it? Good question.
Yeah. So there we go. We've got through 6 days, and we're back to Greaves slagging off Josh Brownhill, but in a far more analytical way than it was on Sunday. Let's just wrap up. Looking ahead to Saturday, everyone's in this position now of we're supposed to look forward to games on Saturday, aren't we? But there's been this feeling of sort of dread. People saying that they don't even care as much this season or whatever. But it comes round to Friday. There's a game on the horizon. What do we expect? Some sort of reaction from this game? Do we expect? I know I'm not asking for predictions on the results, but do we expect to see the team come out and fight and prove people wrong? Chris?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I'd expect a reaction of sorts. I don't expect a result. I think Palace are just streetwise enough, as they were against Everton. They were bloody rotten. They weren't in the game, didn't look like they were going to score, and then Ayew scores an absolute perler from nothing. And they ended up conceding under a bombardment of corners and crosses later in the game that Burnley aren't going to put Palace under. Like they were at the Turf. They didn't have to do a great deal to win that day, Palace. But I think Burnley will probably, maybe one of those games that they have more than 50% possession in. It's what they do with it. And again, like we say every week, how good are they in their own box and how good are they in Palace's box?
Woody, are you looking forward to Saturday with sort of trepidation or a glimmer of hope?
Well, we tend not to do too badly at their place at Selhurst Park, do we? We've had a few results on the road. Now, whether
Matt
that...
Lawton.
Yes, exactly. And whether new fella's had enough time to have the new manager bounce, we will wait and see. But I don't really expect us to do anything. I expect us to put on a slightly better performance and to at least respond to what happened against Arsenal. I don't expect us to pull any flowers up.
Justin?
Yeah, more or less the same, really. I think after putting in a performance like that, there can't be, they must be aware of the feeling amongst the fans, and how disappointing that display against Arsenal was. So you've got to expect something different from them, haven't you? Whether Company will make changes or not, I'm not so sure. He tends, if memory serves me right, to throw them back in if they haven't performed and see if they can do any better. But like everybody else, there's absolutely no sign whatsoever that we've got what it takes to get a result there. But you would expect a little bit more application. Let's put it that way.
Greavesy, when we do our podcast debrief on Sunday, are you expecting to be in sort of angry, sweary mode, or are we going to be in sort of spotting the positives and clutching at straws mode?
Well, I've gone and got myself a new bottle of Benedictine, so I'm just going to sit and Benny and Ot it throughout the Crystal Palace game. The thing I'm most looking forward to is probably Tony Gale on the international feed. I know he's ex-Rovers, but I always quite like listening to Tony Gale on Core Comms. For me, I think he's pretty fair and he's a bit old school. So yeah, I do genuinely look forward to matches, and at times I genuinely look forward to matches being over. Because you can get on with the rest of your life then, can't you? So but no, Benny and Ott for me, I'm gonna be nursing hangover from Friday night. So Air of the Dog, your favourite, Chris's favourite, Benny and Ott. Happy days, let's have some.
It's too early in the morning in America for Benny to not, but there's never a good time for Benny or not either.
JJ never says it's too early, mate.
Hey, never says anything these days, does it? Anyway. Let's leave that one. Thanks very much for joining us. If we didn't get to any of your questions, we apologise. We'll try to get to them over the next couple of episodes. I think we got through quite a lot of them, though. And, look forward to Saturday's game. We'll be back on Monday morning for your usual debrief when hopefully we are in jovial mood. Let's see. Have a great weekend and up the Clarets.